Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is 2017's The Star on the Shore for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition by Dark Cult Games. Okay, first a bit of history. The Star on the Shore is the product of a successful Kickstarter that was funded early in the year and delivered a few months later. The level I pledged at had the softback version of the scenario, a PDF of it, and an upgrade to the pre-existing Call of Cthulhu 7th edition adventure, The Haunting, which is suggested as the lead-in for this scenario. As I don't own a copy of The Haunting, I will be saving this for a time when I do. The adventure is for 4 to 10 investigators. This is Dark Cult Games' first foray into the worlds of H.P. Lovecraft. Okay, to the main book. The cover is a quite superb piece by the artist Evgeny Malyshenkov of the Thatcher Island lighthouses that I feel is reminiscent of the early 1980s Call of Cthulhu scenarios. This brings me to the back cover. Normally in my reviews I don't comment on the back cover, but in this case I felt I should. The back looks like a zoomed in pixelated JPEG, the type that used to be on the back cover of gaming magazines in the early 90s, and it's frankly awful. The quality control is lacking here, I feel, which is disappointing as the book has really nice production values throughout, being in full colour and on glossy paper. Okay, to the inside. Here we have a thank you to the playtesters, and then following that we have some Lovecraftian phrases in Aklo that I'm not going to try and pronounce here as they're fairly complex, but needless to say they're pertinent to the scenario. First up is the introduction. It mentions the usual things about it being a 7th edition scenario and that the player handouts a free-to-vote copy, and it then says, "It is August the 17th, 1921 in Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. Timothy Jennings of the Museum of Fine Arts has hired a crack team of investigators to find the stolen statue. Only the keeper should read beyond this point, so if you intend to play this, stop reading now." We then have a prologue that is meant to give us a flavour of the scenario, and this leads us on to the premise of the adventure. Hundreds of years ago, 2 statues were carved of Cthulhu from the same granite in a cave. One was 25 foot tall, the other 2 foot tall, and this was the key. Combined with the appropriate ritual, these statues could draw a star spawn to Earth. These plans were thwarted when the smaller statue was stolen. This statue has been hidden thousands of miles to the south, and knowledge of the statues and their use vanished into history. In 1802, Jim Rahn, while exploring the cave, found the statue and the words carved into the wall. He spent years studying the words and managed to convince others to follow his new god. Jim eventually managed to translate the words and determined that to summon Cthulhu, he needed Cthulhu's children, the Starspawn themselves, from their home world. Only then could those Starspawn trapped with Cthulhu in Arlay be freed. There was a problem, however. He needed the smaller statue. His followers began tunnelling out 8 summoning circles under the city of Rockport, and Jim handed over the reins to his destiny to his son, Sam. After decades of construction, they were complete, and Sam set about tracking down the smaller statue, eventually finding it in a tomb in southern Peru. In 1912, Sam eventually arrived back with the statue and was eager to show it off to a friend, Reverend Michael Thomas, in his Chapel of Contemplation in Boston. This indulgence of his ego ultimately led to his downfall. That night, the police raided the chapel, and Sam, who had stayed with the statue there, died in the fire that erupted. Sam's son Gabriel was tormented by his father's death. He blamed the Reverend for this and vowed vengeance. He arranged for the Reverend to escape prison, although it never explains why the Reverend is in prison, and planted evidence they had left the state. He then offered the Reverend sanctuary in Rockport, where the Reverend told Gabriel of his father's visit and the statue. In his youth, Gabriel had befriended and charmed Deep Ones in the tunnels under Rockport, where he discovered a spell that could turn a human into a Deep One hybrid. Taking his revenge, Gabriel transformed the Reverend into a hideous monstrosity. They then both returned to Boston to search for the statue, where a group called the Darkwing Detectives interfered with their search at the Chapel of Contemplation. Unknown to Gabriel, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts has hired Dr. Timothy Jennings of the Darkwing Detectives to excavate the chapel, where he recently uncovered the statue. On August the 5th, Gabriel and some Rockport men broke into the chapel, killing the night guard, and stole the statue. 2 nights later, they used the power of the statues to summon a Starspawn that was, unfortunately, young, weak and injured. The summoning of the Starspawn was noticed as an astronomical observation that day. There's a fog over Rockport that is a metaphysical tension between the 2 worlds that is being held by the 2 statues. If either are destroyed, the fog will lift. If both are destroyed, the Starspawn will be pulled back to its own world. Several months earlier, Gabriel used a wide-ranging charm spell that draws weak-minded people to Rockport from the surrounding area. These individuals come to Bearskin Neck and are compelled to paint the famous Red Barn and lighthouses of Rockport. This steady flow of artists provides the cult with sacrifices for the Deep Ones and Starspawn. Gabriel has used a calming spell on the Starspawn to keep it in its pit and satisfies it with daily sacrifices. Both these spells will be broken if Gabriel dies. The painters will be confused and want to go home, and the Starspawn will come to the surface to feed. Initially, the investigators will be hired to retrieve the statue and become embroiled in Gabriel's plot. The cultists are described as bold, but not stupid. They will be friendly and helpful, but will report any transgressions to the police, who will then in turn report to Gabriel. Also noted is Gabriel's ability to use the crows of the city to spy on the investigators. We are told there are several ways of defeating the Starspawn, but that this list is not exhaustive. The scenario begins with the investigators meeting Dr. Jennings at the chapel, where he can show them the place where the statue once stood. We then have mention of GPS coordinates, which is odd as GPS was first used by civilians in the 80s. An oversight by the writers, hopefully, unless some strange time travel is being used. The investigators can pick up some clues here that lead them to Rockport. Dr. Jennings agrees to finance the investigators to a reasonable amount to recover the statue, and fears that the theft of it and the recent astronomical event, the summoning of the Starspawn, are connected, although why he comes to this conclusion is never explained. We then have a small section on getting to Rockport, and then we have the town itself. Each location in the city is listed along with everything of interest there, as well as some of them being mapped, although there is no scale to the building maps and they range from tiny to half a page. Each person of interest is statted out and their motives and goals are described. The internal art is generally nicely done, but some of the pictures look like touched up photos, whereas others look like paintings and drawings, and others almost look cartoony. After the description of Rockport's environs and population, we have some notes on running the scenario, which give some good hints for keepers, and a list of events and the order they're supposed to happen in. Also, it has a section on dreams that the investigators should have to add flavour to proceedings. It then lists the cultists and the new spells that Gabriel uses, and then gives us a list of ways that the investigators can achieve defeating the cult and the Starspawn. Following the main scenario, we have an additional adventure that accompanies the Star on the Shore, Key to the Abyss. In this, the investigators are either charmed or decide themselves to remove a rune-covered cannonball that is wedged into the bell tower of the old sloop. The cannonball is holding in a portal to the abyss, and the investigators have to devise a method of removing it and sealing the rift behind it. We then have some decently produced handouts, a pull-out map, and some pre-generated characters that feel a bit underwhelming, and some internet reference notes for various points in the scenario, and a blank Keeper's Notes page, although who uses these notes pages to write in their books these days is a mystery. Star on the Shore has many problems, but definite good intentions. When you're competing in a market where Masks of Nyarlathotep is not only considered the best scenario for Call of Cthulhu, but pretty much the best scenario for any system, you have to raise your game, and unfortunately the Star on the Shore doesn't achieve this. It has a distinct air of being the publisher's first book, and to my eyes has a feeling of being spell-checked but not proofread. For example, the witch house is described as being used as a bread and breakfast, something a spell-check would ignore but an editor would jump on. There's also the issue, at times, of just too many different fonts being used, which I find can make it a bit jarring to read. The city of Rockport is crying out for a general description, and the locations are not written in any particular order, almost like they were done as the writer thought of them. Also, the amount of bookkeeping that this scenario requires would exhaust the keeper in my eyes. Additionally, there are lots of plot holes and a general lack of explanation around. Why is the Reverend in prison? Who are the Darkwing detectives? Why is Dr. Jennings, a detective, outsourcing his work to other, assumedly less capable investigators? Another thing that bothered me was Gabriel himself. He's clearly a powerful sorcerer with some frankly overpowered spells, so the reasons as to why he is still trying to summon Cthulhu after his father and grandfather failed felt a bit implausible. Also, the Key to the Abyss scenario seemed completely superfluous to proceedings. The good intentions of the writer are clear in the superb production values, and I really wanted it to be a good scenario, but I felt it fell short. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't purchase anything else written by Dark Cult Games, or as they are now known, New Comic Games. I feel with a good editor and a bit of direction, they could produce some decent work as they seem to have the right priorities. A well-produced scenario with good art that was delivered roughly on time and not prohibitively expensive. However, in this instance it falls way short of being capable of taking on the big guns of the role-playing world. I give the Star on the Shore a 5 out of 10, but I expect the writers to learn from the experience and feedback and their next product, Devil's Swamp, which is, at the time of writing, running on Kickstarter, to be better than this. If you enjoyed this review, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget to check out my other reviews. Bud out.